Vancouver, a state court judge has sentenced a former soccer coach to nearly 16 months in prison for sexual offenses that immeasurably hurt for young female athletes. Judge Deanne Gaffar said Bob Birarda, a former Vancouver Whitecaps and Soccer Canada coach, violated the sexual integrity of 4 players, 3 of whom were under 18, during offenses that occurred between 1988 and 2008. Gaffar sentenced Birarda to 2 years less per day on Wednesday. He is sentenced to 15 months and 29 days in prison, while the remaining 8 months of his sentence will be served under a range of conditions, including house arrest. The judge noted that Birarda could be granted an earlier legal release and then continue to serve his probation. Birarda, 55, who lives with her husband of 29 years, pleaded guilty to 3 counts of sexual assault and sexual touching with young people in February. Birarda's underlying balance of power was an aggravating factor, while his early admission of guilt was a mitigating factor in his sentence, Gaffar told the North Vancouver courtroom. The judge said Wednesday that each of the victims were talented and determined athletes who tried to play football at a high level before Birarda's crimes. Gaffar said he was safe with the victims, who feared that denying the former coach's involvement in the victims would hurt their football careers. At one time, he read an apology from the victims and everyone else he said he had disappointed, including his family, saying there were no excuses or justifications for his actions. At his sentencing hearing earlier this fall, he said he was filled with the deepest shame for sexual offenses that range from having sex with a player when he was his trainer in his early 20s to stalking a 17-year-old player at the age of 40. The story continues. In the latter case, Gaffar said, the girl attended Birarda's football academy between the ages of 11 and 14, and it wasn't until 2007 that the 17-year-old was selected as a candidate for the women's team of the Vancouver Whitecaps, which she coached. The judge was around the time that Birarda's communication with him turned into a similar pattern to his previous crimes. He sent messages to her saying that he had put a spell on him and that she had fallen in love with him. Gaffar said the woman quit football on her 18th birthday. Birarda's lawyer, Bill Smart, requested 8 months in prison, while the Crown had offered 2 years less per day. Gaffar followed Royal's recommendation for harsher punishment, saying that Birarda's victims suffered from anxiety, self-doubt, and in some cases depression into adulthood, and that his behavior was affecting their ability to trust others. As the judge described the effects his behavior had on one of the victims, Birarda put her head in her hands and stated that the woman was fearing him. Gaffar said there were significant extenuating circumstances, including Birarda's early admission of guilt, that victims did not have to relive their experiences while testifying and showed deep personal guilt. Gaffar added that he received counseling to deal with disgust and regret over Birarda's behavior, and that he accepted the results of 2 psychological assessments that were found to be at low risk of reoffending. Gaffar noted that Birarda was exposed to domestic violence by her father when she was growing up, and she witnessed the same with her mother and siblings. Birarda said she was sexually abused by a family member when she was 10 or 11 and later swam competitively by an older swimmer. He had intermittent suicidal thoughts from 2008 to 2019, and was hospitalized for several days in 2019 for suicidal ideation. Gaffar noted that the case has drawn public attention, and that stigmatization of crimes can be seen as a form of punishment in addition to imprisonment. The judge said Birarda's lawyer argued that a recent decision by the Canadian Supreme Court to increase sentences for sexual offenses against children and youth did not deal with historic crimes, and that Birarda faces more stringent consequences today than at the time of the events. Gaffar, however, did not accept this argument when determining Birarda's sentence, saying that the High Court's decision was valid and a call for clarification to accurately reflect the gravity of such crimes and the criminal's moral guilt. He said there has been a societal shift in how sexual assault is viewed in the years since Birarda's crimes, and that the High Court decision reflects a more modern understanding that calls for greater attention to the psychological consequences. After getting out of prison, Birarda will spend 4 months under house arrest and then 4 months under curfew at 8 p.m. by 6 a.m., followed by 3 years of probation. Other conditions include no contact with the 4 victims, and with a handful of specific exceptions, no women under 18 are allowed to be present. The conditions did not include a complete ban on coaching. Instead, they are not permitted to participate in any coaching or volunteering opportunities involving women under the age of 18, without prior written consent. After the judge summed up the terms of his sentence, Birarda was handcuffed and taken out of the courtroom. Gaffar said another date should be set for the defense attorney and the Crown whether to include it in the sex offender information record. This report from the Canadian press was first published on November 2, 2022. Brenna Owen, Canadian Press.